This is a reading, oddly enough, from a paper-bound book, an actual old-fashioned book. Yay! Called Earthbound by an old-fashioned person named Joe Haldeman. That happens to be me. So, let me see. Who am I? The person asking that is right at my elbow, and she knows who I am because I bought this house. I am Joe Haldeman. I am a science fiction writer and a professor at MIT, and this and that, Grandmaster of Science Fiction. Let me see. And I don't know much about Second Life. I've been on a couple of times. I'm actually not much of a computer guy beyond using it to write books and the old, chat rooms and so forth. Fairly nice guy. Only fairly. No, Wizzy, I don't teach physics. I only have a bachelor's degree. So I teach writing science fiction, actually, and writing genre fiction. Let me see. I'll just read from the first chapter here. I'd been off Earth for so long I didn't recognize the sound of gunfire. We were walking up a gravel road from the beach at Armstrong Space Force Base, where we just watched, I don't know, the end of the world. People were checking phones, watches. Nothing electronic was working. Even my wrist tattoo was stuck at 10:23. That's when the rocket we were watching lift off sputtered out and fell into the Pacific. It didn't explode or anything. It just stopped, like everything else. Guns did seem to work, hence the merry popcorn popping sound. "Get down, Carmen," Namir said conversationally. "We don't know who they're shooting at." Everybody was kneeling or lying on the road, below the level of the sand dunes on both sides. I joined them. An older man in a white suit, clutching a sun hat to his head, fancy camera on a strap bumping against his chest, came running down the gravel, looking anxiously back at the gunfire. Card? I wouldn't have recognized my brother if he hadn't called a couple of days earlier. He almost slipped on the gravel, but came to rest crouching next to me. "Sister, love." He was still looking back at the gunfire. "What the fuck is going on? Weren't you supposed to be taking care of all this alien crap?" "Didn't quite work out," I said. "It's a long story. If we're alive tomorrow, I'll give you chapter and verse. There were a couple of especially loud bangs, I guessed from bombs or grenades. Where did Namir go?" "Back there," his wife Elsa said, jerking her thumb toward her other husband, Dustin, who pointed toward Snowbird, who pointed all four arms to the right. I should note that we were a mixed group, not to say a menagerie. 3 humans from Earth, 3 from Mars, and 1 actual Martian. And now my brother, who was something in between. Card waved at the Martian Snowbird and tried to croak hello. He'd stayed on Mars for the required 5 years and then escaped back to Earth. Never could speak Martian well, as if anyone could. "Hello, Card. I remember you much younger." "Fucking relativity," he said. "To me, you used to be my older sister." "I guess we'll sort it out somehow. I was born 84 years ago, but figured I'd only lived 37 of them. My bratty little brother was twice my age now, in a real sense, from acne to patterned baldness in one stroke." Namir came clattering back with 2 automatic weapons under one arm and a holstered pistol in the other hand. He gave the pistol to Elsa and a machine gun to Dustin. That's good. All the spies had guns. Elsa did something complicated with the pistol, inspecting it. "Tell me you found a gun shop behind some dune." "Didn't kill anybody. But somebody's going to be looking for them," Dustin said. "Not for a while." He looked at Card. "You must be Carmen's brother." Card nodded. "You must be one of the spies." "Namir, we have to find someplace less exposed." "The last place we drove by, did it look like a motor pool?" Elsa said. "I remember, yes. Sandbag wall around it. So maybe there's no one there now, since no vehicles seem to be working." "We can't just walk up with guns," I said. "Right, so you go first. Once the shooting stops." Actually, I hadn't heard any for a minute or so. "What direction was it coming from?" I asked Card. "I guess the press and VIP area. They had bleachers set up. They were going to leave me there even though I had a pass. I paid a guy to take me to the last checkpoint a half-mile from here. Glad you found us, I said, and stood up cautiously. The motor pool was about a block away, one low building and dozens of blue NASA trucks and carts. No people obvious. Paul, let's go. He got up and Merrill followed him, and then my brother. I can talk to the natives, he said. Lived in California 35 years. Leave the armed guard with Snowbird, Paul said. Martians might not be too popular right now. Don't risk anybody's life for me, the Martian said. I won't live long in any case. You don't know that, I said lamely. I can't live on human food and only have a few days' worth of mine here. The only renewable source is in the Martian colony in Siberia. I can't walk there, or I could if I had time, and it might be pleasantly cold. But it would take a long time. I can't live off the land. The power could come back any time, Namir said. We still know nothing about how the others' minds work. No need to comfort me, friend. I lived long enough to swim in the sea. Namir stared at her for a moment, nodding, and then looked toward me. Okay, Carmen, go up to the motor pool and nose around. If the coast is clear, give us a signal. He considered that and shook his head, smiling. I mean, you stay here with the gun, and I'll... Don't be such a man, Elsa said. Carmen, do you know how to shoot? Never learned, no. So you guys go up unarmed and knock on the door. None of that shooting's anywhere near us. Okay, 3 unarmed space travelers versus God knows how many auto mechanics with wrenches and battery testers. Don't try anything aggressive, Namir said. Just give us the signal, and we'll come up behind the sandbags. Well, I could scream my lungs out, I said. Just kidding. We walked up the incline and then down the paved road. The last of the morning cool had baked off, and the motor pool shimmered in the heat. What is it about the power? Card asked. I saw the rockets sputter out and crash, but what does that have to do with cars? He might be the only person in America who didn't know. Walking down this road toward us, he couldn't have been watching the cube when it happened. The others pulled the plug, Paul said. When they disintegrated the moon and filled nearby space with gravel, that was supposed to turn Earth into a no-spaceflight zone. Only last week. That seemed pretty obvious, but the rocket jocks had to try anyhow, with heavy shielding and lasers to blast their way through the gravel. So they turned off all the free power? Card said. That's serious. How long has it been since there were any actual power-generating plants? It's even more serious than that, I said. Your watch and your cell won't work. It affects batteries, anything electrical. Not everything, Merrill said. Our brains are electromagnetic, electrochemical. Smokeless powder works in guns, Paul said, so I guess chemical energy is okay if it's not making electricity. They didn't explain anything, I said, just that the free energy we'd been using came at the expense of some donor world. As punishment for defying them, we're the donors now. For how long? Forever would be a good guess, Paul said. We've got a lot of adjusting to do. Card stopped walking and slapped his palm to his forehead. Jesus, how many people died in the first few seconds? Anyone with artificial organs, Merrill said, or on life support. Hell, just pacemakers. Tens of millions, maybe hundreds. People flying, Paul said, unless the planes had pilots and the pilots were able to glide in and land. Not many can do that without computers, even if they were near a runway. Card nodded. A lot of people in cars. The LA freeways would be a moving junk pile. Everybody on autopilot going 150. Don't cars have fail-safes, I said. Yeah, but they're like the opposite of an electromagnet, engine braking. I don't see how they could work without current flowing. My kid brother was suddenly an engineer with a lifetime of experience. We got to the door of the motor pool building. Paul knocked twice and pushed it open. Hello? Anybody here? We're over here, a voice reverberated in the gloom. Who are you? Space Force pilot, he sort of lied. We were down on the beach watching the launch. So were we, sound of footsteps coming our way. A man and a woman in blue NASA coveralls came out of the murk. When we couldn't raise anyone, we came back here. What was that gunfire? We don't know, Paul said. Came from the reviewing stand, sounds like. Press relations getting rid of witnesses, the man said. Be serious, Wilbur. I'm Katie, this is Wilbur. She pointed at Paul. You're the famous guy, and you're the Mars girl. When I was a girl, I introduced Merrill. You went off to the aliens, the others. She shook her head. My grandmother was a girl then. She watched the takeoff. Brightest star in the sky. But you're not. She's 80-some. I guess that relativity does work. I had to smile. Seems to work for me. The man cleared his throat. The others are behind this? The rocket falling and the power going off? As punishment, Paul said, and explained what we'd seen. Not everybody had been glued to the cube during the launch. How long would it take for the word to get around? Word of mouth and written message carried by hand. 2 more bursts of automatic weapons fire. Wilbur went to the door and peered out in that direction. Hope that's our guys. Has to be, doesn't it? Katie said. But who are they shooting at? Probably just shooting in the air, crowd control. But I wish we had a weapon here just in case. We have a couple, I said, and he looked at me sharply. We don't want to look dangerous walking up here. We didn't want to look dangerous walking up here. They're back on the road to the beach with the rest of us. Better bring 'em up. I started to reach for my cell. How long would that reflex survive? Went to the door and waved both arms. The 4 of them came out. Holy shit, he said. Is that a Martian? No, it's 2 ostriches sharing a potato costume. Elsa and Dustin trotted toward us. Namir came slowly, covering Snowbird. She was wearing a dirty white smock the size of a tablecloth, dragging along on 4 legs made for Martian gravity. She liked humans and Earth as abstractions, but I think the reality was getting a little hard on her. We heard there was a Martian on the base, Katie said. They're not dangerous, Wilbur said. Heavens no, Snowbird might hurt you if she fell on you. The 3 people look dangerous, she said, though it might be the guns. Soldiers, I said, simplifying. They were with us on the starship. I introduced Elsa and Dustin as they sidled in, and then Snowbird and Namir. Keep a lookout, Dustin, Namir said. Thank you for sheltering us. We shouldn't be here long. He gestured toward a long lunch table. Let's sit. Namir sat at the head of the table and began disassembling and inspecting his weapon. If this were a military operation, which it's not, Paul said quietly. We won't forget that, but if it were, there's a standard hierarchy of concern. First ammunition, then water, then food. Communication is in there, irrelevant now, and mobility, which seems to be shoe leather. First ammunition. You don't have any here? No guns, Wilbur said. A couple of signal flare pistols in the locker with the life rafts. Water we have plenty of, Katie said. Our own water tank. Not much in the way of food. A snack machine, some leftover bagels. Food is going to be the long-term concern with supply lines broken down. Dustin, tell them about the farm. Fruit farm? Namir slapped his gun back together and traded places with Dustin. Yeah, the family farm, the commune where I grew up. It's only about couple of hundred miles to the north. I thought they disowned you, I said. Well, they did, but that was like 70 years ago. Conservative bunch who ran things will all have died out by now. Long walk, Paul said. Moving at night, Namir said. Still, less than 10 days. How far would you have to walk before you get out of the desert? I asked. 12 miles, Wilbur said. Actually 11.6, going straight west on the access road, just north of here. Where is this farm? Near Vivalento, Dustin said, up by the Oregon border. Head north on 17, Katie said. Good as any, no traffic. What are you 2 going to do? I asked. Strengthen numbers, if you want to come with us. No, I'd better head home, she said. Wilbur nodded. No disrespect, Miss Snowbird, but I don't think I want to be traveling with a Martian. I wouldn't either, Snowbird said. You could never tell when they were being ironic or just logical. All of us ought to ransack this place for provisions, Namir said. Could you show me those snack machines? We followed Wilbur through the gloom to the snack bar alcove. There were 2 machines full of snacks behind glass, which turned out to be unbreakable plastic. We toppled them over with a crash, and Wilbur found a crowbar that allowed us to break the locks and pry the backs open, satisfying in an obscure way. The machines weren't operated by money, but by ration card, so Wilbur or Katie could sit there and get a candy bar every 4 hours. We didn't have cards, not having yet joined the 22nd century. While the men ransacked the machines, I went with Katie on a fruitless search for something like knapsacks to carry the booty in. In the mailroom I found a metal cart, a frame that held an empty mail bag and rolled on 4 sturdy casters. We took it to the water rescue lockers, where I liberated 2 flare pistols with 2 belts of 4 flare rockets each. Back at the snack bar alcove, we let Katie and Wilbur stuff their pockets in 2 bags, then arranged the rest into piles according to shelf life, so we could put the relatively perishable things on top, fruit and sandwiches that had been refrigerated. A drink machine yielded 10-liter bottles of water and a couple dozen less useful soft drinks and near beer. My rolling cart would hold about a quarter of the bounty. Nobody turned up anything like knapsacks, but a storage room had a drawer full of random sizes of cloth bags. Together we could carry all of the water and most of the food. We could leave behind most of the soft drinks and near beer. Snowbird insisted on carrying 2 light bags of snacks, though she couldn't eat any of it. She refused water. I can live for a week or more without it. I come from a dry planet, and she wasn't going to last a week unless they turned the power back on. Katie and Wilbur wished us luck and headed home, facing hours of walking. Neither had family to worry about, but Katie had cats and fish to feed. Might as well feed the fish to the cats, Merrill said after they left, or fry them up. Namir was watching them go. Seemed to be nice people, but you never know. They might be back with others. Maybe we should start moving, Dustin said. We don't want to travel in daylight, especially not loaded down with food and water. There will be plenty of people out there with neither, but with guns. So let's get some rest while we can, Elsa said. Those of us with weapons stand guard, 2 hours at a time. We made sure all the doors were locked. The windows were silvered for insulation, so nobody could see us if it was dark inside. I found a cot in a back room, but couldn't sleep, my mind spinning. What if we made the 2-week-long trek without incident and Dustin's family welcomed us into the fold? What about the other 7 billion people in the equation? There wouldn't be 7 billion after 2 weeks, maybe not half that. I could hardly imagine what the crowded cities would be like. Even if the governments tried to provide food, water, and shelter for everyone, how could they do it without communication and transportation? When I was in school, we were told that the world had only 3 or 4 months' worth of food in reserve. I suppose that in America most of that was in grain silos, thousands of miles from the population centers on the coasts. In an abstract sense, I suppose the very poor had the best chance of survival, used to living close to the bottom of the food chain, as if the rich would politely stay away when the shelves were bare. I wondered whether Dustin's family had guns. If they were pacifist vegetarians, we might only find their bones. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, Merrill was shaking my shoulder, whispering, "We've got company." Amir and Elsa and Dustin had their guns at the ready. Through the window you could see a ragtag crowd, maybe 20, and someone was pounding on the door with something heavy and metallic. None of the people in the crowd had guns visible, but we couldn't see the ones who were pounding on the door. No police or military uniforms. Most of them wore white name tags. "I think they're newsies," Card whispered, "and VIPs from those bleachers where they put me first." After a minute, most of them moved on, by ones and twos. The one guy kept pounding on the door, rattling the lock. Then he left too, carrying a metal pipe. Paul returned from watching out the back windows. A couple of guys tried to start vehicles. They're gone now. How could they start them without keys? Like metal keys, Card said. They just have a code you punch into the dash. Those are all NASA, Wilbur told me. What's the firearms law like now, Card? Namir asked. Do people have guns at home? California, you can have guns, but you can't carry one without a permit, and permits aren't easy to get. That's academic now, I guess. Maybe. We'll see how it shakes down. I wonder whether cops will report for duty and try to enforce the law. Where we're headed, Dustin said, I don't think there'll be much law. Maybe in small towns and some big cities where cops can work on foot. Some people have really big gun collections, Card said. Dozens of working weapons. Most of them are electric pellet guns, though. Gunpowder and smokeless weapons are expensive, and ammunition is taxed like $100 a round. Plenty of military and police ammo around now, I guess. Namir looked at his clip. I've got a double magazine, 40 rounds, and Dustin, you've got a single one? He nodded. Elsa held up the pistol. 9 here. So we're not getting into any gunfights. We have to assume that any group we encounter with weapons will have more ammunition, It's not a war, I said. We shouldn't even be thinking in those terms. It's more like a natural disaster. Unnatural, Dustin said. I wouldn't wait around for the Red Cross to show up. I have a radical thought, Merrill said. Instead of heading for the hills with guns, why don't we try to find something like the Red Cross and volunteer? Try to do something constructive. That was so like Merrill, social worker to the core. It's a good thought, Paul said. But where would you go? What would you do? It would have to be a city of some size, I said, where they might already have charitable organizations in place with a substantial number of volunteers, with resources for emergency work. Like a computer network and ambulances, helicopters. Namir shook his head. More useful, they might have first aid kits. I wouldn't like to be the guy in charge of guarding them, though. You think too much like a soldier. Merrill sat down at the table across from him. That might save our lives someday, but it's not everything. If there's going to be an alternative to chaos, to anarchy, we have to pursue it right away. You do that. I'll keep you covered from behind something solid. It's not always about guns. May I say something? Snowbird had all four arms folded, a posture communicating thoughtfulness. I do not have a dog in this fight, as I once heard a person say. My destiny will not be affected by your decision. Namir, your supply of ammunition is small. You have 4 seconds worth, and Dustin has 2. When it's gone, your weapons are dead weight. You can shoot single shot, and we can find ammunition. But there will be people guarding it, who will kill to keep you from it. And how much can you carry? They won't be making any more of it. There's probably a lot of it around, but I concede your point. If you plan to survive more than weeks or months, violence is the wrong direction. When you run out of ammunition, what will you do? Elza did not surprise me. My husband, unarmed, is more dangerous than any 2 men with guns. A nice sentiment, he said, but I want to choose the 2 men. But Snowbird is right in the long run, Card. Walking north, what would be the nearest city? Depends on what you would call a city. Custer City, technically, but don't try to get a good meal there. How far? 25 miles, I guess. That's about as far as we're going to get on this amount of water. Card smiled. Have you tried a tap? What? This isn't a spaceship. You turn on a faucet anywhere and water comes out. That caught me, too. Live on recycled heat for years and you start to feel real personal about water. A shed outside had armloads of empty plastic gallon jugs. We didn't take the ones that smelled of solvent, and rinsed the others well, just by turning a tap and letting gravity do the work. How long would that last? Of course, we had no way of telling. You could see the water tank a couple of blocks away. One stray bullet could empty it, or an aimed one. The sun would be up a few more hours. Paul and Namir took binoculars up on the roof and didn't see any gatherings of people, just a few individuals in pairs. Paul came down with his suggestion. We ought to go find out whether our celebrity is worth anything. Go back to that headquarters building and find out what's happening anyhow. A reasonable suggestion that made my knees weak. I'll come along as a guard, Namir said. No guns. We'll probably be safer without. He looked at Merrill, who smiled and nodded. I wasn't so sure. We didn't have a magic wand that would make other people's guns disappear. Elza held out her pistol handle first. Paul, at least take this. You must have had some training in the Space Force. He took it and stared at it. One afternoon back in '62. This is the safety? She nodded, and he put the pistol in his waistband, out of sight under his shirt. Thanks. Pray we don't need it. I put 2 bottles of water and some snacks in a bag and slung it over my shoulder. I'd lost my sun hat down on the beach, so pulled a faded NASA cap off a peg. Paul straightened it. Now we're official. If you're not back in 2 hours, we'll come after you, Namir said. I checked my wrist tat, and it was still 10:23 for the rest of my life. Make it 3, Paul said, without suggesting how either of them could tell time. Some secret military thing, no doubt. Take us half an hour just to walk there. Careful by the bleachers, Card said, unnecessarily. Paul nodded and went out the door. It was a relief to be alone with him, the first time since we'd left the billet at dawn. He took my hand and squeezed it. You and me. Me and you, I said automatically, a song refrain from when I was 18. Paul, an ancient man to 29. We walked in silence for a minute. It's a lot to take in. I'm still trying to sort it out. Guess we're all still in shock, he laughed, except Snowbird, the only one who knows for sure she's going to die. Poor thing. Poor us. Poor whole fucking human race. How many will be alive a year from now? A month from now? In a month, they'll still be eating groceries, I said. He nodded. In a year, each other. Save you for last, I pinched his butt. You always were a tough old bastard. We both laughed, keeping that one monster at bay. There was a lot of trash on the road with no wind to blow it around. Press releases and promotion packets, as well as cups and food trash. And this wasn't the main avenue out. People who lived in California would be going the other way, assuming they were headed home. A couple of 100 yards before we got to the bleachers, there were the first signs of violence, dark spatters of blood dried in the dust. No bodies at first, but then Paul followed a trail of drops to a place behind a portable toilet. A woman in sexy silver shorts who had been wounded in the abdomen. She'd held it in with her hands for a couple of dozen steps and then collapsed. Her guts were a pile of glistening gray and blue, awash in blood. Paul checked her pulse while I usefully leaned the other way and vomited. He held my shoulders while I gagged and coughed the last of it and handed me a water bottle. We don't have to go any farther, he said. We do, I said, my voice a hoarse croak. It will probably get worse. He started to pull out the pistol, and I leaned against him. Leave it hidden. Someone might be watching. Of course. He put his arm around me and we continued up the road toward the HQ building. Look at the brass. Someone stood here and fired toward the bleachers, a scatter of brass shell casings to our left. Or up in the air, I said. No more bodies. That's something. He stopped. This isn't smart. Let's go back to... We were maybe 20 yards from the entrance to the temporary building. A tall, fat man stepped out onto the wooden deck, brandishing a weapon, and fired a burst into the air. You all put up your hands? We did. He clumped down the 3 steps to the ground. Look what we got, Jimmy. Y'all from that spaceship, the Starship. Saw you on the cube last night. We are, Paul said. Another person, presumably Jimmy, stepped out of the darkness. He was also holding a weapon and binoculars with a strap dangling. Been watching you. You come up from the motor pool. They were both wearing NASA coveralls, spotless, with the fold lines still visible. Demi's were a couple of sizes too large, the sleeves rolled up. You work for NASA? I said. Yes, we do now, the fat one said. You want to help me launch my rocket? Paul tensed. Don't. We don't mean you any harm, I said. I bet you don't. The fat one stepped forward, his weapon on Paul, looking at me. You keep it in your pants, Howard. Bet they got that goddamn Martian back there. He stepped down to join us. Don't you? I don't know who's down there now, Paul improvised. You saw a Martian in the binoculars? He was with you all on the cube this morning before it got shut off. And the other aliens did that, Howard said. Time we did something back, Jimmy said, pointing his weapon down the road. Let's us go have a talk with Mr. Martian. He started walking. Then we figure out what to do with you all. Howard came alongside me and put his big arm on my shoulder. You see, you was with all those men 50 years. He grabbed my breast hard. Don't seem possible. I was going to give him an elbow to the ribs, hesitated, and heard a tiny metallic click. Then there was a huge explosion and a shower of blood and gore in front of me. Then some voices I could hardly hear, my ears ringing. At first I thought all the blood was mine, I was dead. But then Howard fell in front of me hard, the top of his skull shattered, an artery still pulsing. I turned around and saw the other man, Jemmy, trying to run backwards, both his hands out to protect himself from Paul's pistol. Paul had the pistol gripped in both hands, but they were shaking so violently he probably couldn't have hit the man if they were in a small room together. I saw all this in a strange state of floating calm, realizing that the little sound I'd heard before I went deaf had been the safety on his pistol. The man was running like a sprinter now. Paul fired once over the man's head and stooped to pick up the weapon he'd dropped or thrown down. I looked back at the big man dying, his arms and legs moving feebly as the blood spurt slowed to a drizzle. He'd shed his new blue trousers. I leaned over and burped a little acid, and opening my mouth wide made my ears crackle, and some hearing came back. Paul came up from behind and gathered me to him, still shaking hard, sharp sweat smell and gun smoke. Killed him. Jesus fucking Christ. I was still floating, stunned. That's the most religious thing you've ever said to me. So that's the first chapter. So that book came out a few months ago, and I guess the paperback will be out in December. Question: how long do you think before we see a real apocalypse? Well, in a way, we have already seen it, but in another way, I don't know. I actually am pretty much an optimist. Yeah, I think having made it this far, we have a good chance. What do you say? We have to make it long enough for high-tech war to become obsolete, which is, don't hold your breath.
How much time do you dedicate to writing your books?
Oh, that's all I do. So I write a few hours in the morning, and I don't know, every day. It's not like it was hard work. So
it is hard work.
That's how you get to Carnegie Hall, right?